Alright, so we had talked about our top 10 least favorite movies before, and now we're going to talk about our top 10 favorite movies of 2014. Alright, my number 10 is a movie that has just come out. It's The Interview, actually. Just barely made my top 10 favorite list. It's an R-rated Seth Rogen comedy, so if you're not into that, this isn't gonna win you over. It has a lot of vulgar humor in it, a lot of immature potty humor, a lot of raunchy dialogue and that kind of stuff. For a Seth Rogen comedy, though, I felt like it was a lot smarter than a lot of his movies are typically. The way they portray North Korea in this movie and Kim Jong-un and that kind of stuff, it's very satirical, and satirical isn't the sort of word that I would use in a Seth Rogen comedy usually. Like, This Is the End, or Pineapple Express, or Neighbors, anything like that. I feel like, in a way, it's an important kind of movie. It's sort of a movie where I think some people do need to see this movie. I'm really curious to see the reactions of what's going to happen once it gets snuck into North Korea and the people there start watching it. Because, aside from just being a raunchy comedy, it is a movie about taking a modern, major world leader, a dictator, who really needs to be humbled and brought down and made fun of in a really interesting way. I mean, like, at one point, a character says, like, no, we don't need to kill Kim Jong-un. What we need to do is show the people that he's not a god. And so this movie, it does it in this very silly way, but they do show him as a character that doesn't necessarily need to die. He's a character that needs to be brought down, and he needs to be a character that needs to be replaced or whatnot. So yeah, it's the first Seth Rogen comedy I think I can say that I actually really enjoyed. I mean, aside from Pineapple Express, but this one's, I think, is a much better movie than Pineapple Express.
Yeah, I agree.
Honorable mention for comedies goes to 22 Jump Street, by the way.
Yeah, that was a good one, too. My number 10 film that I really enjoyed this year was actually Hayao Miyazaki's last animated film that he made, which was called The Wind Rises. This was an interesting movie because it was a different, unconventional take on a biopic. The movie explores the life of Jiro Horikoshi, who was actually the designer of the Mitsubishi Zero fighter during World War II, which was actually the plane that was used to bomb Pearl Harbor as well as Midway. So already you're kind of going into a subject that a lot of American audiences might kind of have some resentment to. But the way Miyazaki handled this was actually very tender. It was very enchanting. He kind of delved more into the imagination and the dreamlike world of the main character as he's dreaming about flight and innovation. And for some reason I kind of felt that was actually a smart decision. It actually made me get on the side. Now, a lot of Miyazaki fans kind of have some qualms with it. They felt like it didn't delve too much into the history, didn't raise the stakes, didn't really explain what was going on. But for me, I kind of bought into the whole experience. In fact, I love the animation. It's probably some of the best animation I've seen Miyazaki do. And I love the romance that was tied into it, with his wife being an inspiration for what he did to the very end. And I love the note that it leaves on. I think it was a great note for Miyazaki to end his animation career on. It felt very much like a love letter to, you know, his craft. And I couldn't think of a better way for him to, you know, exit the stage.
Yeah, fantastic little movie. I saw it too. It's great. Number 9 on my list is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Yeah, I love the Planet of the Apes movies in general. I'm a sucker for them. I have all the other movies on Blu-ray. This was the one that I think really grabbed my attention as like, oh, this series could go in a really interesting direction. See, Rise of the Planet of the Apes was interesting because it was kind of rebooting the franchise of sorts. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, though, is I feel like it's the Apes movie that we were all hoping to see, because this is the one where really the apes are now, they're getting more intelligent, they're starting their own communities, and they're riding around on horses with machine guns and that kind of stuff. It's great. It's so much fun. Yeah. This is one where it really delves more into the science fiction territory, and it's a really well-made movie to boot. I mean, the CGI is great in the movie. Yeah. Like when you can do close-ups of CGI apes and make you believe they're not CGI apes, it's something to be said for it. And the movie and the characters are really interesting. It's dark, but it's not a nasty kind of dark. It's a darker movie, but it still has an element of fun and science fiction to it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It harkened back to kind of the 70s, I think, sci-fi movies that I've seen a lot.
I'm going to actually kind of tie in with this because this actually made my number 9 spot as well, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And the reason why I kind of put it on my top 10 list. I have, you know, most other movies I would have placed in that spot, is just the first 10 minutes of the film. We're in the forest and we're seeing how these apes communicate. We're seeing them hunting. We're seeing Caesar communicate with his son, teaching him life lessons. And there's such a tribal spirituality about it that I felt very captivating, something I had never seen before in the Planet of the Apes, you know, movies. But it really does beg this question of, when things are set into motion, can we ever really stop it? And you see Caesar struggle with this, and he's trying to find this balance in the world. And just the note it ends on, I think it couldn't be done any more perfectly. So I think that's the reason why I made my top list as well.
Okay, so because it covers both of our number 9.
It does, yeah.
Number 8 on my list is the Lego Movie, which actually it's funny. This is one that it's a little bit lower on my list than I thought it was going to be initially. But making my list, there's just so many great movies that came out this year. Actually, yeah, it's full of energy. Not really a whole lot to say about it. People love this movie for a reason. It's high energy, great writing, fun, colorful characters. It's almost the ultimate style over substance movie, but in the best possible way.
I think that's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, because I remember when I first watched the movie, actually, I was a little taken aback by it. I'm like, oh, I don't know what I think about this, because they throw so much at you. Everything's busy on the screen, just because everything's built of Lego bricks.
Yeah.
But you really get used to it, and the movie just keeps moving in such high energy. It's just such a fun movie to watch.
It is.
It's great.
Number 8 for me is a very obscure movie I don't think many people have heard of. It's called Force Majeure, a Swedish film that actually revolves around a family on a ski trip. But it's more than that. In fact, when I saw the trailer, I was kind of intrigued. I went and saw it with some friends. Didn't really expect much out of it, but then as I kind of was delving into what the filmmaker was doing with this film, I realized it's a very smart movie. It begs the question of, how do we view father figures in the family unit? You know, we place these expectations on them of being fearless, brave, willing to defend their family at any cost. And the husband does this one act that kind of just throws all that into question. The wife starts questioning his loyalty to the family, to the children. It makes him feel like less of a man, and he can't redeem himself in front of their eyes. I don't know, Sweden is actually released some very interesting films, like Let the Right One In, even just the Dragon Tattoo Girl trilogy that has come out of it. It's produced some very interesting films, and I think this is going to be up there with one of them as a film that will really encapsulate the style of what Sweden is about. You know, very cold, stark kind of settings, but asking those really deep questions that some people aren't willing to go to.
Number 7 on my list is Guardians of the Galaxy. I had to put this one on my list somewhere. Actually, it's kind of fitting that I put it right next to the Lego Movie. By the way, a lot of my top 10 films, they aren't necessarily in the exact order that I like them, but it's kind of varying. My ranking of movies change, you know, as I think about them more. But
mine is in order though, so I organize my stuff.
He like had it down to a mathematical equation.
Yep.
But Guardians of the Galaxy, again, like the Lego Movie, it's just a bundle of fun. This is a movie where I was grinning from ear to ear from beginning to end. Yeah, again, not a whole lot to say about this one because everyone loves it. It's
yeah, I think what I love about this movie, because it's on my list as well, what I love about this movie is like if someone had taken a sci-fi space action adventure from the 1980s and put it in a time capsule, and Hollywood just kind of like dug it up again to show it to the world. That's basically what this movie is.
Yeah.
Everything about this is a homage to the 80s.
It is. Yeah.
I mean, you got the campy humor, you got the colorful characters, you got the
neon lights.
The neon lights, the mixtape soundtrack that you kind of remember listening on your dad's jukebox, and it's a great film, and it doesn't take itself seriously. At the same time, it's great for what it is.
It's funny also because one of the comments that people who are naysayers of this movie will say, like, oh, they just Tarantino'd it and they threw on catchy music into some scenes, and you take some quirky characters and they throw them in there. You don't need a good story, you just need all this stuff to catch audience's attention. Yeah, they did that, and it works, and it's fun, so what's wrong with that?
Yeah, obviously James Gunn knew what kind of a film he wanted to make when he kind of made this.
Yeah.
And I kind of appreciate it because it has its own vibe, it has its own energy, and it sets us apart from all the other carbon copy Marvel movies that we've seen in the past decade. And I appreciate for what he did.
Yeah, so we can throw in any time and enjoy it.
Yeah, enjoy it. And as in the words of Groot, I am Groot.
You're not Groot.
I am Groot.
You're not.
We are Groot.
We are Groot.
We are Groot. So number 7 for me was The Grand Budapest Hotel. For me, this is not the best Wes Anderson film. You know, he's done some better work in the past, but he's definitely gone in this direction of having much more of the fun kind of plot storytelling. It's not very serious, it's not very broody. It's fun to see the story unfold, but it's very interesting because the whole set design of Grand Budapest Hotel is a treat to watch. To actually see, how Wes Anderson incorporates his miniature sets and actually paint this landscape of the Asian Minor. Also the cast as well. You have an A-list cast that's like driving you all the way, with even Ralph Fiennes doing some of the best acting I've seen him do in ages. This is like, I've never seen him actually act this well as, you know, the concierge who has a refined taste of excellence, and him having this little lobby boy, Zero, who's like tagging along with him everywhere. It's definitely a fun movie. The adventures that they have, the humor in it is very, very offbeat, and yet it's quirky and whimsical in its own way. And I had a lot of fun watching it, and that's the reason why it's there on my list.
Alright, down to number 6, Interstellar. I have a mixed bag relationship with Christopher Nolan as far as my love for his movies.
Yeah.
There is not a single Christopher Nolan movie that I have seen that I disliked. Yeah. I love them all. They're great. Interstellar, I think, is probably... now it's one of my favorite Christopher Nolan movies. I think part of that's because he's tackling a genre that I really love. And what he's essentially doing is a movie that's inspired by a lot of the science fiction movies that I love. There's obviously 2001: A Space Odyssey is the main reference point whenever you talk about Interstellar. You have to talk about that one, and I really love that. I'd even say there's some traits from Blade Runner, even. I mean, like, which you wouldn't think about in a movie like this, but in the way that he deals with the characters and how you go in depth into McConaughey's character. I love the way it was shot. The movie kept me gripped from beginning to end. It's full of plot holes. There are some stuff that doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense, but the movie's well made enough that I can overlook that, or I wasn't noticing it while I was watching the movie. Yeah. I can appreciate the movie for what it is. Yeah.
Alright. Number 6 on my list was Nightcrawler. Wow. Talk about Jake Gyllenhaal coming out of the grave as the creepiest man you would ever meet. The acting in this from his part is definitely what captivated me about this movie. You can tell there's something not right with the guy, even by the fact that he's not blinking as well throughout 95% of the film. But it does kind of delve into this very creepy underbelly of America, how we are just like feeding this machine for shock media, like constantly. Like we're always driven to, you know, see the next bloody incident that comes on the roadside or next shooting incident that just happened in the neighborhood. It definitely captured that world very well, how we become so desensitized by that kind of reality that, you know, these are people's lives that, you know, are being jeopardized. But the fact that it's all told through Jake Gyllenhaal's perspective, I think if anything, just made it much more entertaining for me. Not so much entertaining in a good way, but just entertaining to watch and just being fascinated by how this character works and how, in a way, he kind of has a reflection of all of us to some degree.
Number 5 on my list is X-Men Days of Future Past.
Alright.
Yeah, I love the X-Men movies in general. This one's easily my favorite of the X-Men movies. I feel like it's injected new life into the X-Men franchise. It's a time travel movie, but it has fun with itself. It was interesting seeing the older actors. You know, you have Patrick Stewart facing off against James McAvoy. Not facing off against them, but they're both in the same movie portraying the same characters. As with any time travel movie, it runs into some timeline issues, but the movie was more tightly written than I expected it to be. I expected it to just be kind of like, oh, another superhero movie, whatever, gonna watch this. But no, it's a genuinely good science fiction movie, just superheroes aside. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. Right. It was fun seeing all the characters interact with each other, you know, from the different timelines and everything. And yeah, it's just tightly written. Great movie. And
also Hugh Jackman's ass.
Yeah, it gets its own credit, I think.
Fan service. Number 5 for me was the Lego Movie. I just fell in love with this movie. I mean, it kind of goes back to my childhood of just building Legos and that whole master builder imagination world where basically you can just create anything. And that's kind of like where I think the movie just hit at the core, is that that's the audience that they were trying to teach to. It's not just the kids that they were trying to appeal to, but the adults who grew up with the Lego bricks. And the humor, it was kind of like always being thrown at you. But the pacing was perfect, and I think the guys who did this, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they're perfect at that, as they've proven with 21 Jump Street and especially this movie.
Yeah.
And for me, it was very enjoyable. You know, great voice acting, cast actually worked, characters I cared about, and then even the message at the end was something that wrapped it up perfectly for what it was going for. And that's the reason why I think it just is so high on the list.
Number 4 for me is The Raid 2. This is some of the best action filmmaking I've seen in a while. It's also one of the perfect sequels because it takes a film that's already fantastic. The first Raid movie, the action is so draining because you watch it and you just feel exhausted at the end of every fight scene.
It actually feels like you're running through those hallways, smashing through those windows every step of the way.
It really does.
It gets your adrenaline going.
And the sequel doesn't try to do the exact same thing twice. The sequel becomes an entirely different kind of movie, but it's still fantastic. I mean, as opposed to being handheld and moving around a lot, they lock down their shots a lot more. It's a much bigger story. It's just great how expansive they make the story while still not losing the heart of what these films are. Is just as great action movies. Yeah, it's very violent, very brutal, as if you've seen the first one, you expect that. And it has a great rewatchability value. So yeah, I really enjoy it. The kung fu is amazing too.
All right, number 4 for me was it's another very obscure film I don't think anyone really cared about this year, The Immigrant. The Immigrant is I believe it's James Gray's 3rd movie. He's done Two Lovers as well as We Own the Night. I went into this movie not knowing anything about it, not expecting much, and being blown away completely. For what this movie was, I thought I was going to be bored to death with it, and yet it gripped me. It got to me at the core, and I loved it for what it did. It tells the story of a Polish immigrant in the 1920s who comes to America, and in order to try and get her sister off Ellis Island, she has to basically prostitute herself, with Joaquin Phoenix being like her businessman, pimp. He's quite convincing of a bad guy. The thing is, and he doesn't play it like, you know, the mustache kind of twirling villain. He's a very believable villain, and you know where his motives are coming from. But more than that, I love the cinematography and the way this movie was handled. It pays homage to those great filmmakers like Rossellini, Francis Ford Coppola. The way they shot the movies there has a very nostalgic, very vintage look to it. Also, this movie has probably one of the best portrayals of confession and forgiveness that I haven't really seen in a movie for such a long time. Granted, a lot of people find the movie a little melodramatic. For me, I appreciate for what it is, which is a love letter to those movies from back in that era, which, you know, I grew up on. And just the cast, Marion Cotillard, Joaquin Phoenix, and even Jeremy Renner just do fantastic with each other. And it's been one of the best movie experiences I've seen in a while.
Nice. Number 3, A Walk Among the Tombstones.
This was a movie I didn't have the privilege of seeing, and I regret, actually.
Yeah, it's a Liam Neeson action film, or not action film, it's like a crime drama, actually. It's a very interesting movie, actually. It wasn't what I was expecting. The movie is very dark, but never uncomfortably so. The villains are fantastic, like some of the creepiest villains I think I've seen in a really long time. The style isn't super straightforward. I mean, they're not afraid to run with unconventional music choices and play around with slow motion during some scenes, but it's just, I don't know, everything about this movie just really had me gripped from beginning to end. Liam Neeson is fantastic, the villains are fantastic, the characters around him are fantastic, the story is engaging. It's one of the few movies this year that really gripped me from beginning to end, and I just ran with it, and I had no idea where it was gonna go. You have scenes there where I mean, like, the movie involves a little girl who's kidnapped by these villains, and you have no idea whether or not they're actually going to kill her. Like, this is the sort of movie where, like, oh my gosh, is she gonna make it out alive in the end or not? Because that's just how ruthless these villains are. And it's been a while since the movie's done that to me, and I loved it, every minute of it. It's fantastic.
So my number 3 film of the year was Whiplash. This was a movie that just came out of nowhere and just caught me completely by surprise. Everything about this movie I think was done perfectly. I think someone compared this movie to Raging Bull, but with drumsticks instead of boxing gloves. And I really feel that kind of energy in this movie from the beginning to the end. Just the acting alone in this from Miles Teller as well as J.K. Simmons in a great dramatic role. I mean, he's always been like a comedic side supporting cast actor, but this was like one where he basically showed his strengths. Like he got to a real sadistic side, and it got uncomfortable, and yet it was so believable where this character was coming from. I think what also just made this work for me was the editing of it. I mean, this was some very intense editing, and the editing alone I think is what built up the progression of this film. But for me, it was just the ride to actually see his journey to the very end of this, climactic, battle between these two odds. That I thought it was just a treat to watch, and that's the reason why it was number 3 on my list.
Nice. Number 2 on my list is Grand Budapest Hotel.
I'm surprised that that was higher on your list than on mine, because I don't know.
It almost made number 1 for me, actually.
Really?
This is one of the few movies I actually went back to I see again in theaters. Saw it twice in theaters.
Oh, nice.
I like Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson's fine.
Yeah.
This is the first movie of his that I really loved. I love the dark humor in this one, especially a lot of some of the violent moments in this movie just kind of come out of nowhere, like, oh crap! and this movie, it's so whimsical and lighthearted and so stylized, but every frame is like a piece of art to me. And this is how a lot of Wes Anderson movies are, but it felt like an homage to some of the big Technicolor movies of the 40s and the 50s, even stuff like Black Narcissus with the the mountains as being matte paintings and that kind of stuff. It's just fantastic. It's a joy to just watch. Like I could watch this movie if the sound was turned off and just watching the visuals alone.
Number 2 for me was Guardians of the Galaxy.
There you go.
I mean, this movie, I saw it 3 times in theaters. It's that enjoyable of a movie, and it's been very rare that I've seen like a big blockbuster like Marvel movie that kind of had so much hype for it and it lives up to its expectation. I think just kind of how it pays that homage to the 80s with just the mixtape soundtrack, the effects, the humor, and just like how it just has fun with this concept. It doesn't take itself too dark or too serious. It's just a fun movie, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And when a movie can do that to me, it gets up there.
Yeah.
So basically we've kind of listed all of our top 9 so far. We're hitting down to our top 1, but here are some honorable mentions that we have not yet gotten into.
So some honorable mentions that didn't quite make my top 10 list, but were great movies. 22 Jump Street, which we talked about briefly. John Wick, Chef, All You Need Is Kill / Live Die Repeat / Edge of Tomorrow. Noah, Monuments Men, Amazing Spider-Man 2, which I absolutely loved, and Transcendence gets honorable mentions as well.
Yeah, for me, Interstellar, it didn't make my cut, but Chris Nolan film, gotta love it. As Above, So Below.
That's a fun one.
Noah, as well as I kind of enjoyed Transcendence, actually.
Yeah.
Transcendence was an interesting one. So, Joe, what was your number 1 movie of 2014?
My number 1 movie of 2014 was Godzilla.
How did I know you were gonna say that?
Of course, it's the ultimate Joe movie.
Of course it is. It's actually ultimate guy movie in general when you think about it.
Yeah, I grew up with Godzilla. I love the heck out of it. This new movie I felt like was the perfect Godzilla movie for the American movie audience. One thing I loved about it was the fact that they hid the monsters so much, because the moments that they do show them on screen, it pays off really, really well. There's a lot of humor injected into the movie, such as the scene where the monster's about to get into a giant fight, and then they cut to like a little TV screen, and it's kind of happening off screen, which was okay for me because it's a funny moment. It felt like because they held off on the monsters so much and they focused on the human stuff was somewhat interesting. But because of that, the moments that Godzilla was on screen, it felt like it was worth it. Every single minute of it.
If anything, by keeping it from the human's perspective, you really get the magnitude of these creatures.
Oh, yeah.
In just the space, as well as the destruction that they're doing, which hasn't been really captured that much in Godzilla movies before. With this, you really feel like you're actually watching the monsters as the city is crumbling on top of you.
Yeah. And the scope of the monsters is fantastic too.
Yeah.
This is one of the few giant monster movies that make them feel really big and massive. And you know, when they're sized up against those skyscrapers, the way the camera kind of looks up at them is just it sends chills down your spine. So yeah, this for me was the ultimate rewatchability value movie of the year. And you got a great cast to boot also. I mean, you got Bryan Cranston's in there, Kim Watanabe is great. It's, yeah, just an overall enjoyable experience, and I think a very well-made movie.
Well, my number one movie of the year 2014 was one I think I was excited ever since I saw the trailer, Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. I think what I love about this movie is who it's really about. Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton is really channeling some good energy in this, and obviously he is going back from his career in general. You know, you have this actor who played this iconic superhero role, and then his career never got off the ground, and he's trying to make something, even though it's like he's losing his mind and his family and everything around him in the process of it.
Yeah.
But more than that, it is a fantastic experience. One thing I just was mesmerized is the camera work in this. It is done seamlessly as a one-take film, and the way they do that illusion, thanks to Emmanuel Lubensky's camera work, it's flawless, and it is a trip to actually just watch as you're just weaving through these corridors, down like canopies, onto the set, even just out into Times Square. For me, this was a movie that took some daring risks, and it had a real good cast to boot. I mean, I've seen some great performances from Emma Stone, Edward Norton, Naomi Watts, even Zach Galifianakis, who I've never really seen in a dramatic role before. But most importantly, Michael Keaton. This has been some great acting on his part in about 20 years that I've seen. And, you know, just the whole message of the movie, it's very much like an American tragedy, where you have the iconic hero having his last stands to try and redeem himself, to have some value. And I think director Illiterates did a fantastic job, and I've never been a huge fan of his films, but this is definitely one that I rank really high on my list. And yeah, I gotta say it was the best experience of me this year.
What were some movies that you enjoyed this year? Go ahead and put it down in the comments. See anything that we left out.
Come on now.